sort of were different and how they sort of complemented each other, that sort of aspect of them working together as a partnership. Can you talk a bit, we've talked quite a bit about George, can you talk a bit about John, his personality, and how his personality differed from George's,
right,
and how they complemented each other?
And I'm just going to click just to sync. Okay.
Well, John obviously was much more in the background, and I didn't know him as well as George. He was always very cheerful, always smiling, very easygoing. He came from a very loving family who were always tremendously supportive of his musical career. I wish I knew more about him, but you know, you remember the difficult musicians you work with, but the ones who are very amenable and relaxed the memories are not quite so vivid. I wish I could tell you more, but they just worked very good together. And again, I knew George mostly from writing pop songs and ballads, whereas I really wasn't that much involved with him when he was in his fusion jazz material. But I imagine John was a tremendous inspiration in that. And again, I could be wrong, but I believe John was the one who helped him into electronic music. You know, he had one of the first single note synthesizers, I don't remember the name. Oh, another thing that may or may not come up is that he was left-handed. And I don't know if he strung his guitar reverse or not, you know, I just don't know. But he was a fabulous piano player. You know, again, their relationship, I don't know. You know, we just liked hanging out together and writing songs and all sorts of bizarre environments, and in Myers Park living rooms and George's bedroom, which actually was relatively small and relatively chock-a-block, in my parents' basement. One time we went on a tour with, he was in a group called Bandit that, again, I don't really know all that many details, but they did play a few gigs, and he said in one of them, when they played one of our songs, All Right With Me, the people were standing on the chairs and applauding. Oh, and back in the day, there were all sorts of clubs that would only seat maybe 50, 60 people, but you could make a living gigging them. And we went on a tour in South Carolina, which was an interesting trip. And during the breaks, George would play pinball, and he was an amazing pinball player. I guess it makes sense if you have the manual dexterity to be musical in the sense of timing, that you would also be a very adept pinball player, but he was. And he was also an expert at that, I haven't a clue what it's called, but it's like a bowling alley where you slide a hockey puck. And he always was winning tons and tons of free games, and when he would, you know, rack up quite a few extra bonus games and had to go back on stage, he would let me play them out. And another interesting thing about both of them is, especially George, was that he didn't really have any vices. He, you know, maybe he smoked a puff or two of pot, but he definitely did not drink. He would always just have a Diet Coke. And despite the fact he could have had his pick of any woman in the school, he didn't really, you know, it wasn't all that big deal of him. And I think it wasn't that he was puritanical or abstemious, but he was just so absolutely, utterly focused on his music that all the distractions that are so alluring to so many musicians were irrelevant to him.
What actual recordings did they do? Were they working on an album?
Well, we wrote these songs again for Bandit, for demos just to show George's music. Now, their jazz stuff, which they were going down working with John Gelinas, unfortunately the late John Gelinas. Sorry,
That's
can
all right.
freeze. That's me.
Let's go. Should we turn it off, or what do you think?
Yeah. Unbelievable.
No, that's all right. That's fine.
Well, no, the thing is, nobody calls me. You know, Max and my wife and you are the only people in England who have my phone number, so.
It must be one of us three.
Yes.
Two of us are here.
It's hard to say. Now, we record these because my hope was that we would make it as songwriters. And there was this thing called Hollywood lead sheets that probably was a bit of a scam, but every week you would get a Xerox paper of which groups were looking for what material, and they were always biggies like Three Dog Night. I can't remember any of the others, and I would send out, God knows how many tapes I sent out of our music, but probably kept the Charlotte post office in business a good few months. And anyway, one of the songs we wrote was called Lazy Dancer, and Trini Lopez wanted to record it. Now, who is Trini Lopez? You know, I remember Trini Lopez from Lemon Tree. And I was incredibly excited. I was actually in London at the time, staying with Mayor Baba's brother Adi, and Russell had gotten the letter from Trini Lopez, and he phoned me up. This was back in the day when phoning London was a big deal. Now, of course, you know, it's nothing, but at the time it was. And he called me incredibly excited, and of course I was incredibly excited. So when I got back to Charlotte, I called George, incredibly excited, and George says, Trini Lopez, I'm not going to let Trini Lopez record my song. My music is too good for Trini Lopez. I thought, okay. And of course we thought, you know, somebody better than Trini Lopez would come along. And I did not realize at the time Trini Lopez was the second biggest draw in Las Vegas after Wayne Newton. And had Trini Lopez recorded that song and incorporated into his act, God knows where George's career could have went. So Trini Lopez, if you're out there listening, the song is available. We'd love for you to perform it. And, you know, it's hard to say where we were going because it was cut short. It's all too soon. You know, I mean, you know, I'm from the South, the land of guns, alcohol, and fast cars, and I don't know how many of my friends have met premature ends, but none has really devastated me and so many other people, and to this day, I haven't really come to grips of it, of the unfulfilled potential that George and John represented. They were really, his music was only in its infancy, and there's no telling where it could have gone. And Charlotte is, to say the least, a somewhat conventional town, and as you can tell by the fact we imposed this idiotic playlist on him, and his music really wasn't appreciated at the time. And now it's 40 years later, and I think people are beginning to realize just what a gifted genius he was and how advanced their music was.
You mentioned off camera about coming from North Carolina, sort of being a middle management town. Could you sort of elaborate on that and how the careers might have been different if they'd been in either LA or New York?
Yeah.
Ooh, sorry guys,
So-
I'm just going to reach that quick.